started. I'll be chairing the morning part of the Finance Corporate Services Committee, and Councillor Davey would still be here for later on in the day. And just for staff and council members, wanting to wish everyone a Happy New Year's. This is the first meeting, so hopefully be a start to a great year. Consent items. Okay, Councillor Ioannidis moves them. Any questions? Okay, and I'll take them all together. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. And there are no delegations. So discussion items for fire department pumper aerial apparatus purchase. Is there staff that's presenting on that? Okay, if you can queue in, please. All right, go ahead, Chief.
Through you, Chair, I can give you just a quick synopsis of the report. We have a pumper tower unit that's due for replacement in 2014. We've done a little bit of research leading up to the purchase and found that there's several stock units available in the market out there right now. I think there's 3 that would meet our needs out there through 2 different, I guess what we would call pre-qualified bidders, essentially. And we can get them at a much greater discounted price than what it would be through a tender process to go out and put a tender out there, have everybody bid on it. Plus they're available right now for us to purchase. So we could see, and I'm not sure exactly what the savings are right now, because I don't have the 3 figures, I don't have $3 figures in there, but we know that they're going to be well under our budgeted target. Just in history, we've done this twice in my time here as chief, and that was through, we looked at stock replacements on both our aerial units, in which a combined savings of almost $300,000 was seen. $230,000 on the first unit and $78,000 on the second unit in terms of savings by going out and doing waiving the tender process and going out and actually purchasing a stock unit already built. We figure when we're looking at one-off vehicles, this is a good process to go. We have a better opportunity to negotiate through our purchasing department, the contract with the company, and get the corporation the best possible value on such a vehicle. If council's wishes that they wish to remain in the competitive process, the fire department's okay with that. It just means that we roll the dice and we risk the chance of losing any potential savings that we may have. We'll still get the same type of vehicle. We'll still get the what we require. It's just that I can't guarantee that there'll be any savings in terms of pricing, and it'll take much longer in terms of purchasing it as well.
Okay, thank you. I have a few questions. Councillor Janetsky. Give me a second.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. A couple of questions on this. I like the approach that staff and the fire department are taking in terms of trying to see if there's an existing vehicle in inventory somewhere and go in that approach. It looks like the 2 examples that you used worked out quite well. Are these vehicles that you're looking at in Canada or in the States?
Typically, I was just discussing with the CAO. He asked me the same question. The manufacturing of fire apparatus are primarily done in the States. I think there might be one company in Canada out in the Ottawa area that does it. They're not on our list of we haven't purchased from them before because they don't provide us the quality or sorry, I shouldn't say the quality, the needs that we need from a heavy duty perspective. Most of the things are manufactured in the States. What we do is we buy through local dealers here in Ontario. The 2 dealers that we're looking at right now, one would be located in Ayr and the other is located in St. Jacobs. So they're both regional dealers, the only 2 in the region that we have.
Now, the vehicles that you're looking at basically meet the requirements that you need, but are there any modifications that need to be done to really suit all your needs that you've been looking at?
So the process that we would take, Councillor, is that we would then, once we get council's, if we get council's approval on this, we would then go to, we would put a request out to these individuals and say, please give us the detailed specs on these, your bottom line pricing and that on what they are. We'd have a look through it, and if there's any modifications, we would have that negotiation with them to make any modifications. Our history on the last two vehicles that we did, we had to do slight modifications where we had to add something on, which was typically very minimal in terms of cost. We had to add an extra compartment onto the front bumper of a unit, and very minor costs. Typically, we see these units meeting our needs and the way they're built.
In reading your report, I gather you wrote this back almost 2 months ago, November the 25th. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And in one of the comments on the second page, you talked that you want to take advantage of the strong Canadian dollar, but the dollar in the last month or so has dropped considerably. What type of impact will that have on these figures?
Well, that's something that we're continuing to look at. Yes, the dollar has taken a bit of a hit, and indications are it's going to take a much further hit in the months to come. That's the indication that we've had. If we can jump on this soon enough, we can take advantage of where it's sitting now. If we wait till the tender and do a tender process, again, we'll take into consideration where the dollar is at the time when the tender is written and awarded. And it'll take us several months to write the tender up, and then it could be 4 or 5 months before we actually award the tender.
Right. Well, I gather with the dollar dropping down to about 92 cents right now, that's roughly about 10% decrease based on exchange and all that stuff. So we could be looking at a 10% factor on this in terms of the cost, possibly?
That could be a 10% loss in terms of our savings,
Yeah.
yes. From November when we were looking at this till now, yes.
That's just an unfortunate scenario. One last question. The vehicle that we have right now, you mentioned, I think it's 9 years old.
That's correct.
What's wrong with the vehicle? Like, can it continue operating? I mean, a lot of vehicles are built now that are better quality and they last longer. As if there's nothing wrong with it, why would we want to replace it?
Well,
Notwithstanding your standards.
What we're starting to see as the vehicle gets older, and we put a life expectancy on this vehicle around 9 years. It's a little different than, because it's got a pumper tower, it's got a ladder on top of it. Not like our large aerial trucks, it's a little bit smaller of a unit. But it's different than our pumper units. So the wear and tear on it is a little heavier. It's a little heavier unit. And what we're finding now is that we're starting to incur additional maintenance costs, and we get to the point where then the maintenance costs outweigh the cost of removing the vehicle from the fleet and replacing it with a new vehicle. And that's why we've looked at the 9-year. And every year when we look at our budget time, at budget time we look at vehicle replacements. We take into account what our vehicle life expectancy is. So we look at it every year during budget process, and 9 years is appropriate for this vehicle.
So based on that answer, then if we follow through and give you direction to go forward on this, what happens with the existing vehicle? Do you try to sell it on the market, and how much would you get for it?
You're correct, Councillor. We will look to sell it, either trade it in or look to tender it out for sale. To be honest with you, I don't know what we would get for it. Pumpers, at the end of their life expectancy, we're getting somewhere in around $5,000 to $10,000 for one of those trucks. That's how worn they become. Something in this range would probably get a little bit higher. I don't want to guess because I don't want to give you a figure that won't be accurate.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Glenn Graham.
Thanks very much, Chief, and I'm glad that there was a cost-benefit analysis done, that you were looking at the mechanical aspects. Was there an inspection done, or is it just an ongoing maintenance that's cumulative, and you're saying it's time based on the 9 years that are standard, plus the fact you are seeing some repair bills?
It's during our regular maintenance checks and things like that we continue to look. There wasn't an inspection done. I shouldn't say that. There's an inspection done on these vehicles each year through the CVOR routine, and they all pass. And sometimes they pass because we've got to do the repairs to get them back up to, and those repair bills continue to increase over time.
So if we tendered this, would the bids be in US dollars anyways?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, so we're really not ahead if we say, oh, let's try and get them in Canadian dollars here locally. It's all done through the States, so.
And that's because we purchased the vehicles essentially through the chassis are all built in the States. You can't buy a Canadian-built fire chassis.
Right. Okay. So that's helpful. And so I guess the discount, you're not sure if it's 10 or 20%, but it would be something similar to the discounts you've had before.
Through this, what we'll do is we'll negotiate the best possible price that we can if council approves the waiving of the tender process.
Okay, thanks very much.
Councilor Vivanovic?
Thank you very much, and thanks for your presentation, Chief. Just on this, so in the report you talk about the trucks being custom built and designed. So I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit about that, and why one department may go with a certain chassis with certain features and another one might use different features.
So when we, Council, through you, Mr. Chair, we look at, when we built a truck, we look at what are the needs of our department in terms of operational. We look at the aspects of how do we make sure our trucks are similar right through the city. So if I take a truck out of the Lancaster station and I put it into the headquarters station, that the equipment will fit on that truck in the same area. And that's why with pumpers, we tend to spec them out. Normal pumper will tend to spec them out and tender them out so that we get the same right through. When we're talking specialty units like this pumper tower and the aerial units, we don't necessarily have to look for specifics that make things consistent across the board. We can look for the one-offs, and that's where it makes it easier to do the go out and see what's there in stock right now. Every fire truck is built from the chassis up. That's why they call it custom trucks. With that, you build your spec and you can build it the way you like for whatever reason. Many departments will sole source just the one for 5 years and have same units all the way through. They have the same parts for their mechanical units and things like that. We've tended not to go that route at this time, although it's something that we continue to explore as to the benefits for that.
And by looking at this particular type of approach, I mean, we've saved significant dollars in the past, but we perhaps end up with a truck that maybe has some added amenities, or maybe we forego a few amenities, if I understand it correctly, in order to get those savings. While that ends up saving dollars on the capital side, have we had any sense that it creates any challenges on the operating side, because we're either having to service things that maybe we wouldn't have otherwise bought, or because we're having to make up for the fact that we don't have certain things?
Through you, Mr. Chair, our experience has not been that. Both of the aerials that we have purchased from stock met all our needs. There might have been a few extra things that were already on the units, but they weren't elaborate systems that would require major repairs. In fact, some of them we may not have purchased because of the cost of them, but have actually provided some efficiencies in terms of the repairs or maintenance for staff. So if I understand that last comment correctly, not only did we save the dollars in the purchasing process, but we also got some added amenities that otherwise we would have never tendered for. Correct. Okay, well that's certainly good to hear. I think that's it in terms of questions, Mr. Chair. Actually, I do have one more, but at the appropriate time I'd be prepared to move this. My last question is actually on this and general purchases to Mr. Chapman. Are we, in light of what's happening with the American dollar right now, we must have a sense of the kinds of things we buy in a 6-month or 12-month period from the United States.
Are we at all considering, because of where the dollar seems to be going, purchasing up a little bit on into our U.S. dollar account for those kinds of circumstances to save some dollars?
Mr. Chapman.
Through the chair, it's an interesting question and one that I can take back, although notionally, fire trucks are the only large purchase I can think of where consistently they're made in U.S. dollars. Okay. We carry a fairly small balance in the U.S. dollar account, and quite often the amounts flowing through the account are quite small, fire trucks being the exception to that. But it's an interesting question, one I'll take back and look at.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I'll come to you afterwards. Councillor Ellington.
Yeah, Chief, a couple of quick questions. Maybe this is just the way my mind works, but how many companies would provide this kind of equipment?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there are probably about, I want to say, half a dozen that we would look at from a local aspect. There's probably 24 of them across North America, and they range from your small little shop in the back corner of an industrial unit to your large manufacturing that both make the chassis and build your fire truck. So the range is big. But we typically look around half a dozen that we would look at here in Ontario.
And knowing you need this vehicle, have you been shopping around at all to see what's available?
Yes, we have, and what we've found right now is that there are 3 units that we know are available right now. 2 are from a company through a dealer in St. Jacobs, and 1 through a company in Ayr.
And again, unless I'm missing something in your report, why would you not find a vehicle and then come back to us about waiving the tendering process, which is obviously in place for very good reason?
Well, the issue is, Councillor, is trying to negotiate that price without the ability to actually go in and finalize things and purchase it. So we know that there's units out there that are within our price range, and I'm sorry, I apologize. I've just gotten back into the office today, and I didn't grab those numbers, but I know they have a range that all fall under what our budgeted target is.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, I don't see any other questions, so Councillor Ravanovich has said he'd move this comment, or?
Brief one. Obviously, our past experience with this has seen significant savings for the taxpayer in terms of these acquisitions, and as the Chief has indicated, we can the process allows for them to come back if that's not what they're experiencing. So I think either way it ends up being a win-win for the taxpayer.
Okay, thank you. I see no one else. I have 2 more. Councillor Fernandez.
I apologize. I meant to push
okay.
in earlier. Just a quick comment. Understanding that this looks like it's going to be a cost savings for us, considering that the dollar has been really dipping. I'm hoping that we can still make use of that savings. Historically, I've never supported something that doesn't go through the proper tendering process, because I think that there's opportunities there for competitive pricing and maybe sometimes a bargain. I'm going to support this time, but I really don't want this to be seen as a precedent. The tendering process is there, I think, to protect the funds that we have, to protect the taxpayers' dollars, because they want us to spend it wisely and respectfully. So, that's just my comments on this right now.
Okay. Councillor Jansky.
I'm in a dilemma in terms of which way to go on this. I like the approach that's being taken in terms of trying to find something that's in inventory and trying to save a buck at the same time. And I think that's a good approach, notwithstanding we're not going through the tender process, but I'm prepared to live with that. I'm not happy with the all of a sudden decrease in the Canadian dollar at this time. I mean, it could come back, but it could stay where it is. And that doesn't, maybe timing is bad here on this scenario. Also, the response I received in terms of on the current vehicle, I think that there's nothing really significant wrong with that. We can extend it for another year or so, is my opinion. I understand where the chief is coming from on this, but in this particular case, I'm prepared not to support it based on those comments.
Okay, I don't see anyone else. A recorded vote has been asked, so if you can have that brought up. And all those in favor, or no, actually it's recorded vote, so Scott, you might have to. Yes. Okay, so that carries. On to the next item. Actually, on the onset of the meeting, I forgot to mention that I'll be asking Mr. Chapman just to update committee on some of the costs that we had to incur for because of the ice storm, but at the end of the meeting. So the next item is for the bylaw enforcement coverage for Lower Dune area. Is there? Oh, okay. Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll give a brief overview of the report that's in front of you. The report comes at the request of the Finance and Corporate Services Committee that set on November 18th with regard to the cost of the special enforcement coverage that we implemented in the Lower Dune area around Conestoga College. The program was implemented in 2007 and consists of a series of extra bylaw enforcement coverage shifts that are added during the weekends in September, October, and April. The primary purpose is for this extra coverage is twofold. It was to assure the residents of Lower Dune and the Dune Pioneer Park area that we would reduce response times by having an officer close by when we get the calls to the noisy parties and that sort of stuff that we find is typically common in areas where we've got a high level of rental residential dwellings. The other piece of this that we asked our officers to do during these special enforcement shifts was to proactively engage the residents, and primarily we're talking in this area about student housing, but to proactively engage them when they see them out and about in the neighborhood, to talk to them about being respectful in the neighborhoods. And in some cases it might be a situation where they detect that a gathering might be occurring, and then they will proactively talk to the residents about being respectful and ensuring that that despite their ability to have fun in their neighborhood, that they have to ensure that the other residents of the neighborhood have the right to the peaceful enjoyment of their properties as well. So it was primarily reducing response times and proactive engagement. And again, as I mentioned, the coverage is typically on weekends, September, October, and April, as weather permits. In 2013, as an example, and this is specifically what Council had asked us to bring back, was the cost of this extra enforcement coverage was in the vicinity of 30 shifts that we added over those weekends at a cost of approximately $10,000.
Okay. And I have a question, Councillor Ioannidis.
Thanks, Mr. Turner, for your presentation. The question that I have is, if you were to add 30 shifts to anywhere else in the city, would you not pretty well see the same results, get probably about 14 extra charges?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, it would depend on where we added the shifts. Obviously, we have challenges in various neighborhoods across the city. The challenges depend on the nature of the nature of the neighborhood. In this particular case, we're talking about a high concentration of rental housing, but also a high concentration of rental tenants that are somewhat new to the city. So, you know, that creates certain challenges. So I can't categorically say yes that it would be, you know, the similar number of charges. It would really depend on the nature of it. Noise charges are the type of thing that we can, much like parking, we can issue those charges on the spot, whereas if it's a challenge with something like, say, property standards, it's a different process where we issue orders and give time for compliance. But yes, definitely, if we added coverage in another pocket of the city, I'm sure that we would see the proactive activity as well as the number of legal actions increase.
Okay. And my other question is, do you think this is a wisely use of our bylaw officer dollars?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I would say it's appropriate. I'm not, you know, when we got into this program, we made a commitment to the residents of Lower Doon as well as the Town and Gown Committee, which was created in around that same time, to say that we would reduce response time. So the two factors that come into play here that when we looked at this was, number one, the nature of the neighborhood, being a high concentration of rental housing with tenants that are often new to the city. So therefore, it creates a challenge in terms of them understanding what it takes to, you know, to share a neighborhood. The other part of it is the geographic nature of Conestoga College is such that, well, we've got an officer on, let's say in Bridgeport, for example. If the officer has to respond to 3 or 4 calls, let's say in Lower Doon, for whatever reason, over the course of a night, we could be looking at 2 or 3 hours of driving time just getting back and forth throughout the city. So those are the two factors I think that come into play here. I do believe that it is an appropriate commitment, given the fact that you know, that we have to balance that response times as well as the just the simple nature of the rental accommodations down there.
Okay. Because, I don't know, to me, when I look at these statistics here, adding 30 shifts and really getting only 14 complaints, extra complaints, doesn't seem value added to it. Like 14 actual charges, extra charges laid for noise complaints. Is that what that's what I've been reading here, is it not?
There's 14 charges during those 30 shifts, yes.
It just doesn't seem like a value added to the community. Because I think you could go anywhere else in the city. If you added 30 shifts, you would find that anywhere else in the city.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think the focus, and I appreciate where the council is coming from. I think that the comment that I would make on this is that the 14 charges were as a result of that coverage or occurred during that coverage. But I think part of the value is in the charges that didn't have to be laid because we were proactive in terms of interacting with people. So quite frankly, and I believe members of council have heard me say this before, that we want to be out on the streets and in neighborhoods avoiding the charges. So I do think that it's difficult to measure, but I do think that there is an element of avoidance and prevention that comes with this as well. So again, it's difficult to put a number to it, but I think there is some value in the fact that we might have been able to avoid some situations before they became situations where the residents had to call in.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Turner.
Councilor Fernandez?
Thank you. I have a couple questions, but I have more of a comment and a general request that after questions I'd like to make.
Give opportunity for everyone.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Turner, for bringing this forward. I think I was sort of the one who was pushing for an understanding of what is occurring in this area because it's in my ward. Just a quick recheck on some of the responses you gave to Councillor Ioannidis. You're saying, my understanding is that the additional officers were part of an agreement or sort of a fair exchange with the community for the increase in influx in student rental properties that we've been seeing in that area.
That's correct. Through you, Mr. Chairman, the word I use is commitment.
Right. So can we have a sort of a sense of what that radius is? I'm thinking about a 1 to 2 kilometer area because most of the students are walking, but would that encompass Green Valley Drive as well? Because I believe you are going out into that area as well, right?
That's correct. Through you, Mr. Chairman, the Lower Dune is obviously the 7 or 8 streets that are adjacent to Conestoga College area, just off of Dune Valley Drive and Conestoga College Boulevard. But the coverage also extends up into, and I refer to it as the Dune Pioneer Park area, which is essentially that area of Green Valley and Arrowhead Crescent, and that area just off of Fisher-Holman.
Right, and the majority of that intensification is...
Off of Homer Watson. Sorry.
So the majority of that intensification is because it's walkable to the college.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman, what we're seeing is that is the area that we've identified. As we sort of map out, when we get calls, we look at the nature of the calls and we get a sense of those properties where we suspect it's student housing. And we do that because we know that there's a particular types of issues and challenges associated with that type of rental accommodation. So we've mapped it out and we're seeing that there's more and more of the student accommodations in that particular area, but it's also stretching out over to what I would call the west side of the Homer Watson area as well.
Okay. You've got your colleagues sitting beside you, and I know that not only do we proactively have additional bylaw officers on, but we've also had the volunteer fire compliance, and I know there's a big long word, Chief Beckett, for a big long phrase, and I'll never say it correctly. So we've had additional fire and bylaw going door to door as well to ensure some safety and compliance within those areas. Is that correct?
In the past, through you, Mr. Chair, in the past we've done some blitzing. We started the program back, I believe it was 3 years ago. We dedicated our entire unit, save and except maybe 1 or 2 people, into that area. Right now, in terms of our volunteer compliance program, we believe that we've got everybody that's willing to volunteer to comply. Council may recall that there was an issue paper as part of the budget process looking at additional fire prevention officer in that area. In order to continue on with that sort of compliance program, we'd need additional staff. And we didn't believe that it warranted, the results would not warrant the money spent.
Sorry, if I can interject, we want to stay on hand as to the item, so but if you can just quick snap.
I mean, that's,
we don't want to make the case again.
So typically we're not doing that compliance program unless somebody gives us a call and says, I'm willing to jump in.
Right, I understand. And the only reason I asked the question, Chair, was I just wanted to show that we have been adding additional resources, not just bylaw, but also fire to the same area. Just another sort of quick question. In the report, or in a previous meeting, we had quite a number of landlords here. And the reason that they were here was because there was the rumor that we were considering a rental licensing bylaw. One of the things I believe that we had come to an agreement with the landlords was that we won't move forward with a rental licensing bylaw at this time, but we were going to work with the landlords in the community in other ways. So would you say that this is one of those other ways that we've been working with the landlords in the community, and is there others that we have been doing as well that you see the landlords sort of stepping up to?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, yes, this is one of the actions we have in place that allows us to monitor the area and keep, and address the issues without a rental licensing bylaw. It's just one of several things that we do, not just with the landlords, but with the neighborhood association in terms of student visits door to door. We have staff here that, as you know, Gloria McNeil has been very active in terms of engaging the landlords in that area with door-to-door inspections along with the police department. We do the neighborhood barbecue to welcome the residents and try and get that interaction between the long-term and the short-term residents. So yeah, this is just one of several things. We have had meetings with the landlord group that have a number of student accommodations in the Lower Dune area, and we've talked to them about a variety of actions that we'd still like to put in place besides those that we have. They have been helpful in terms of organizing visits so that we can go in and meet with the students. They've been active in terms of getting their students out for things like the neighborhood cleanups and the barbecue and that sort of stuff, but there's certainly more things that could be done.
Okay. Has the college ever offered any support besides the town and gown, and in terms of they have security guys that work the premises? Have they ever offered any help or assistance?
In terms, well, they provide the support through the Town and Gown Committee, of course.
Yeah.
In terms of physical support or resources off-site of the campus, short answer is no.
No. Okay. All right. I think that's all. Then I have sort of a motion or recommendation I'd like to
I'll
make.
come to you afterwards.
Okay.
Sure.
Thanks.
Councillor Glenn Graham.
Thanks very much, Chair Singh. And Shane, I appreciate all the work that you and certainly Gloria have done in this area. In terms of drive time, do you have anyone that is dedicated around there that stays in that area, or do they go back and forth between downtown and in that area and Dune?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think I'd have to maybe ask for a bit more clarification with regard to that question. In terms of drive time during the times when we have the special coverage on, there really is no drive time because the officer is embedded in that neighborhood.
That's what I was asking.
Yeah, no, the officer will frequently patrol the Lower Dune area as well as the Dune Pioneer Park area. So that, I don't know what the exact distance is in terms of a radius around the college, but he or she will patrol that particular area. And typically our response times to a noise call when a complaint comes in is almost always less than 10 minutes.
That's fantastic, and I'll have to remember that military term embedded. In terms of complaints, do they just deal with noise, or do they also deal with fire complaints like pits in the good weather?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, what they'll do is they will respond to any call that comes in, with regard to any bylaw enforcement issue in that particular area. So that could be parking, noise, open air burning. I mean, they're obviously proactive in terms of the parking if they see parking offenses. They're also proactive in terms of noise if they sense that something's happening. Fire pits, that sort of stuff, they would be proactive with that if they can see it, obviously. But it's virtually any type of bylaw call that comes within that particular geographic area during that shift.
That's actually helpful to me to know that it's not just noise. Do you have any stats on the other calls that are related to the other issues? Have you seen any change in the patterns there?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'll apologize. I did focus on the noise calls. I could get some. I could send that information through to council later.
Sure, it's not critical. I do support this, and I'd be happy to move it at the appropriate time. But I do think that it would be good to have that big picture. So it seems like this is a bit of a hot spot. It has been identified as such, and you've mentioned that housing does fluctuate with a lot of new people coming in every year that need to be reminded of the rules, and so I do support this area. Are there other areas, though, to Councillor Ioannidis' point, that we should be looking at on a level playing field? If this is a hot spot, are there other hot spots in the city that are like this then?
There are, through you, Mr. Chairman, there are other neighborhoods that have particular challenges. Again, when you take the geographic nature of this area and the distance and the time it takes to get there, that's one of the factors that came into this. Different neighborhoods have different challenges. There's still bylaw enforcement challenges, but they're, for example, open air burning is not something that is overly common in the Lower Dune area. Property standards issues come with a different type of process. Those are situations where an officer will do an inspection and issue an order and give a certain time to comply. It's not an immediate response where the tickets can be issued on the spot. So certainly there are challenges in other neighborhoods. It really depends on on the nature of the challenge as to what our response would be.
Is there anything that would warrant additional resources, I guess, is the bottom line on this question then? If this is warranting additional $10,000 in additional part-time staff hours, would any other area require that attention?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I would go back to the issue paper that was presented to Council in December, and the issue paper, as a reminder, suggests or requests 2 additional bylaw enforcement officers that would do the same nature of work as what we're talking about here. Okay. 24/7 response to things like parking, fire, noise, that sort of stuff. So
that is coming back part of budget to discuss that. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
All right. That's helpful. Thank you very much.
And Councillor Glenn Graham, you mentioned that you would move it. I think Councillor Fernandez mentioned she wanted to bring some, sort of motion, so, or amendment. She was saying so. No, okay. Councillor Brvenovich.
Thank you very much, and a number of my questions have already been asked. Just one that doesn't seem to be covered off in the report. When you look at the time period where you've done that extra enforcement or that level of enforcement, the report talks about it. How would that compare to a regular, like if we looked at that time period or if we looked at other weeks, how would that compare between the call volume during those other weeks versus the same 10 weeks or whatever it was, 15 weekends, I guess?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, if you look on page 2, and I think this is going to where the councillor's question is, on the chart you'll see that, and just simply using 2013 as an example, the total, and this is specifically just noise enforcement, but we had 121 visits, proactive and reactive, in the entire area. 74 of them were during the 15 weeks that we had the coverage.
That wasn't, I didn't quite catch that, so thank you. That adds that clarity for me. And in terms of, and I agree part of this will be dealing with at budget, but as you end up dealing with other problems and other problem areas, from time to time, you do take a similar approach already in terms of how you activate your personnel in a particular area if there's a problem, correct?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that is correct. We do have the ability to dedicate resources or redeploy resources into a particular, whether it's a time of the year that's creating a challenge, and sidewalk enforcement is a very good example at this time of the year, or whether it's specific to a particular issue like open air burning in the summertime. So we do have that ability. But our ability and our capacity to do so is somewhat limited, obviously, for the resource issues that we've talked about before.
Right, and that's what I think the important point that I didn't want to be lost is that your staff, and I know they work very hard, already do some of that in response to issues, but the level of service could be enhanced through what's going to be dealt with in the budget to correspond to citizen expectations.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Etherington.
Yeah, Shane, just quickly, are you satisfied with the support you're getting from both the college and the Town and Gown Committee?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'll comment on the Town and Gown Committee first. The Town and Gown Committee primarily is driven by city staff, so I do think the city certainly holds up their end of the bargain in terms of the support and the resources that and the ideas and the discussion that channels through the Town and Gown Committee itself. So we are actually, we're our office leads the Town and Gown Committee. In terms of the support from the college, it's a difficult question because there are differing opinions out there as to the area of jurisdiction or the amount that an post-secondary education institution can do. Some will say that that their area of responsibility or their area of jurisdiction ends once the issue is off their property and onto private property. I'm not exactly sure where the answer lies. I would like to see a little bit more movement in terms of, and I'm not talking about any particular institution, post-secondary institutions in general, I think need to make more of a commitment. And again, I'm not focusing on any one particular school because as we know very well, the City of Kitchener is not the only city that has challenges with student accommodations and student neighborhoods.
Yeah, I was going to ask you because obviously you'd be familiar what's happening in Waterloo. Does Waterloo get greater assistance from the universities than we do from the college? Like, it really bugs me that we have to pay for this kind of stuff.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, it's kind of an apples and oranges comparison between Kitchener and Waterloo. Waterloo has a residential rental licensing bylaw that generates revenue that allows them to do the inspections and the coverage that they have in place. I can't really speak for whether or not the two universities have a different level of engagement or commitment off campus to the City of Waterloo. It's not really something that I could accurately comment on.
Okay. Yeah, I certainly support this. I know how frustrating it can be for residents to have this kind of problem in their neighbourhood constantly. So that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I'll come back for comments as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Galway-Seelock.
Yeah, before I make my question, Callan asked me to just tell you guys that he's wearing his fire truck bib today. So I just thought he wanted me to point that out. But my question is, Mr. Turner, that you mentioned that this is a commitment that we've made. Is there a proposed timeline to this commitment, or is this something that will be ongoing continually?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we didn't put a timeline on it. It's a commitment that we made back in 2007, and we renew that commitment, so to speak, each school year. I think that if the coverage wasn't there, I think that we would see an increased level of concern from the residents, particularly in and around the response time. So there is it's sort of an open-ended commitment, I guess is the best way to describe it.
Do you see us having the ability to put some sort of timeline on it, maybe even just so that it can be reviewed in, like, this is a good report in the bigger context, so that it's not assumed that it's indefinite, but that there's a timeline. It may continue beyond that, but that there's some sort of review that can formally happen, whether it's here with the Council of the Day or what have you. But is that something that you would be potentially looking to do or could do?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, certainly we would respond to the wishes of Council. So if Council wanted an update once a year or every couple of years, we could certainly provide that, and we certainly respond to Council's direction if there is any. So.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, all right. I think Councillor Fernandez is coming in with her amendment. Do we have to move the motion before the amendment? Or? Oh, right, okay. Yes, you were saying that. Okay, Councillor Fernandez, what did you have in mind?
Thank you. Understanding that this is for information, and there is a sort of a method to the madness here. In reviewing the report and listening to the residents, attending the Town and Gown, I know that the residents in that area, and as the college grows further and further afield, we're seeing more and more student rental properties. We need to provide that. The students bring an economic benefit to our city, but the offset is they're costing us $10,000 a year, just in those 3 months. That doesn't include the cost throughout the year. And certainly, I think it's great that there isn't a part of the city that is suffering because we have the attention on the college area. But I think the reality is, as we heard last June from a number of landlords, that rental properties in the college area is their business. And so I've been observing in a number of areas within the ward a couple of different situations that have been happening. And Pioneer Park Plaza, which is very close to the college and is frequented by the community, but of course by a lot of students as well, not just college students, have hired their own private security company. and it's to deal with behavior and to deal with parking, which are two of the areas that we see a concern in the college area. St. Mary's, the Tim Hortons by St. Mary's, right near the roundabout, has done the exact same thing. If you go there at noon hour, they have a private security officer in the Tim Hortons to monitor behavior, to monitor issues that they have been seeing. So while watching this, I've come to a sort of a suggestion, and I think it can only be a suggestion because we cannot make a recommendation to the landlords. We need to take into consideration that our bylaw staff has been working extremely hard over the last number of years, and especially since I've been on council, I've really even heard from our residents how well the communication and the relationships that are building and growing in that area. But the reality is those landlords, and there's a really good group of landlords, but then there's also landlords who don't participate in the Lower Dune Landlord Association, are making a lot of money, basically. You know, they're charging $400 to $550 per room. Some of them have 6 bedrooms in the houses. Some of them have 10 bedrooms in the houses. So the cost of doing business, as we've seen by the example of Pioneer Park Plaza and by the Tim Hortons, could very well be hiring their own private security officer to monitor the area during the periods of September, October, and April. Not to say that we would reduce the bylaw, because the security officer may not be able to write tickets, but I think the visibility and the relationship building and the fact that the landlords don't want us to engage in a rental licensing bylaw, but they say they want to participate and they want to build relationships with the city, need to sort of put their money where their mouth is. So take that step forward, landlords, and I see the media is here, and let's build that relationship. Don't let the city and the rest of the taxpayers of the city be responsible for paying the fee, the cost of a bylaw officer who in some cases is acting like a private security company for these landlords. So I guess that my message and I can't make a recommendation because we cannot recommend anything to the landlords, but I think being reasonable, let's work together on this. Consider hiring your own private security company out of the revenues of the pool of all of the landlords that are there. Partner with the city so that that private security officer can monitor the area, but can also have a direct connection to the bylaw officers who would maybe normally be in the vicinity, but can also be dealing with issues maybe in the Pioneer Park area or in Dune South, so that their response times are still very quick, as Mr. Turner has pointed out. So that's really where I'm coming from on all of this. I think that our bylaw officers have built some wonderful relationships with a number of landlords, but there's always a few, like everything. There's in the basket of apples, there's always good apples and bad apples. Unfortunately, some of the bad apples have left a bitter taste in the mouths of a number of the long-term residents in that area. So that's what I'm putting out. I'm hoping that between the media and Mr. Turner and I, we can really stress this to the landlords, that I think that this would be a wonderful step in the right direction of partnering with us and the community and accepting some responsibility for I don't want to say the problems, but it does happen. We do have problems because of the student housing and the student rental. And I would really sincerely suggest that the college participate in some of this as well. They see the economic boon to the students that are coming, and as they continue to grow, it is going to continue to be an ongoing problem for Ward 4. So that's where I'm coming from this. So we'll take it where it goes from there. Thanks.
Councillor Ioannidis.
I really don't agree with what Councillor Fernandez has mentioned. I think if you go to any neighborhood and any community plaza, they all have their own security from any school. And to just say that these students are causing more than anything else I think is false. But I think when you look at the statistics here, I think there's more bark than bite here. I think this is not an efficient use of our dollars. I think we could use these dollars to better serve the whole budget as a whole with bylaw. It's one of our items up for discussion. I think that's where our dollars should be looked at and focused at.
Councillor Galloway, Seelock.
Yeah, I just wanted to see where Councillor Fernandez was going to go, but I'd like to put forward a recommendation just that this be reviewed every 3 years in a formal report to council, so that it gives the some assurance that the funding will be there for a 3-year term, but that it can be looked at on a 3-year basis moving forward. So that would be my recommendation, because I just think it's important that these types of programs, either they're going to be successful and we may be able to pull out of the area a little bit, or it may be something that needs to be ongoing, but to review it every 3 years I think is important. But I am supportive of where bylaw is right now within Lower Dune.
For this regular update, would staff need a direction by committee, or you can just take that suggestion as received?
I'm in your hands, Mr. Chairman. I certainly have no problem providing a report every 3 years.
I think it would probably be better if it comes as a recommendation by committee. Would you like to put that forward? Yeah, okay. So for a regular update, so every 3 years, you said? Okay. All right. So that's a motion. All those in favor? Oh. Any questions of that motion? I thought you were keyed in for another matter.
Well,
Councillor Fernandez, that's why.
that does bring to my concern that, you know, if we review this in 3 years, are we going to be pulling this funding away from the community if we don't see the uptake from the landlords and from the college? So, I mean, this was in no way intended to put that coverage at risk, because it is seeing some. It's seeing some positive movement here, and although we're seeing less. 14, sorry, I'm a little bit combobbled here. We're seeing less charges being laid, but that's because of the relationships we've been building. The stronger intention is clearly, as Councillor Ioannidis indicated, many plazas where there are high school students or where there's been behavior concerns all through the city hire private security companies. That's my point. They're hiring them because they see that at the cost of doing business, to keep the business flowing through their stores or their Tim Hortons or whatever their Pizza Hut, whatever their stores are that are servicing that area, that they need to have a private security person there to make sure that the behavior is controlled, or at least kept within a semblance of order. So that's why I'm saying if other businesses see this as a cost of doing business, then the landlords associations need to see this as the cost of doing business. So Councillor Ioannidis made the perfect point for what I was suggesting. I don't think I'm going to, at the risk of saying being fiscally irresponsible, I suppose that could be looked at if I say I don't support a report coming every 3 years, but I would be very concerned that we would lose that funding.
Okay. Councillor Davey?
Thank you. Just to clarify then, there's been a lot of comments, but the only actual motion we're voting on is Councillor Galloway Seelock.
That's correct, just the requesting for an update.
Great, thank you.
As to how we're monitoring that area. Councillor Granovich?
I will support Councillor Galloway Seelock's motion. I think it's good to review anything we do every once in a while, and that's what's being proposed here. And I don't think it's anything we should shy away from, quite frankly. And these are operational decisions at the end of the day that are made by our very qualified staff. They will report back on what's happening out there on every 3 years, or things are happening. Maybe we'll need a report even before that, and the council of the day will make what they deem at that time appropriate decisions.
Councillor Gillingham?
I will also support the motion. I think that we might want to look at it on an annual basis around budget time, or whenever there's a report. That this could be a footnote. It doesn't have to be a full-blown separate report, but it's good to have a picture of what's going on there. And if anything, the college is growing. It's a very successful college, so I think that it warrants this kind of attention, because the problems are, if anything, going to continue because there's turnover every year. So I do think it's appropriate that we do have oversight, and if anything, it reinforces the need for this in this area.
Councillor Janetsky.
I cannot support that. I do agree that we have to look at it. We have an issue, and I can't wait 3 years to have it looked at, especially if this is an ongoing matter. I think it should be reviewed annually or even less. And with a report coming in from staff, but annually I'd be prepared to support it, but not waiting every 3 years. It could be out of control before then.
Okay, there are no other comments. I'll make mine. From what I'm hearing from the motion, I don't think there's any suggestion that we not take any action that's necessary right now, and that's left to staff, as mentioned earlier, as an operational matter, and make recommendations like the information before us, and that more conversation has to evolve from this. I think it's a wise thing to be looking at intermittent periods of getting a report. And so for council to hear exactly how some of the actions that we may have taken or are proposing, how, what type of benefit they're bringing to the community. So I would definitely support the motion at hand. See no other comments. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. So back to this report, I had a question myself, actually. I see no other questions or comments to the information. Mr. Turner, Councillor Fernandez raised a point, and it's a valid point as to what type of responsibility some of the other partners need to take up. But she's also saying that we need to extend that responsibility of enforcing our bylaws that we set to other individuals. Can we even do that? I think one of the biggest issues I'm hearing is a noise nuisance and concern. Parking, I know we can extend that responsibility to others, but can we allow others to enforce their noise bylaw as well, noise and nuisance bylaw?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, it's a very gray area. We do authorize private property officers to issue parking tickets because the Provincial Offences Act allows us to do that. When it comes to other types of tickets, so the other types of tickets that are enforced through a different area of the Provincial Offences Act, like noise and open air burning, property standards, all that sort of stuff. I do not believe that there's a mechanism in place to properly give them that authority. Parking is sort of an animal on its own in terms of the Provincial Offences Act. So I think that I think Councillor Fernandez did mention that despite any private coverage that a property owner might provide, it's still going to require the interaction of our officers for issuing a charge or a summons under the majority of our bylaws. Parking is something where they can enforce that on their own.
Yeah. And for the financial implication, so obviously immediate cost is $10,000, but there's a recovery as well, $4,200. But I'm noticing it's just noise charges. Would that, because we'd have increased coverage or better vigilance of that area, wouldn't there be revenues coming from parking fines as well? Or
through you, Mr. Chairman, there is a bit of a few parking tickets that are issued. We did take a look at the stats, and there's not a lot of parking tickets that are issued during those nights. Typically, if it's an overnight shift or something like that, there may be more. But in the evenings, we don't get a lot. And there may be, I'm going to average it out at about maybe 4 or 5 tickets issued in a shift. So you're looking at about $100. And again, that's assuming that all the fines are paid or not withdrawn at court or whatever. The other thing I should mention, just to be clear, the $4,200 is the potential fine revenue from 14 noise charges, but that's not a guarantee that those full fines are received, because certainly that can be altered in court, or if somebody chooses to fight the fine, or in some cases we could see that a particular fine for a bylaw charge in some cases may not be paid for 2 or 3 years. Okay. So it's not a direct offset.
All right, great. Thank you. I see nothing else. So this was for information only, and there are no other items. So as I had mentioned earlier, that I was hoping that Mr. Chapman would give committee an update as to the response costs for the ice storm, as well as we all know that some GTA municipalities are adopting council resolutions to have their municipalities declared disaster areas, and this would of course allow them to seek for relief funding from the province. But there are some strict guidelines as to that. Although it was an extensive endeavor on our part to mitigate some of the effects of that ice storm. But I would look to Mr. Chapman to give further clarification on that.
Thank you, Chair Singh. So I'll provide updates on both the cost and the provincial program that you've referenced. Operations staff are still compiling the cleanup costs, and as you can appreciate, the cleanup is not yet done. So the costs will continue to accumulate for some time. What I can advise is that approximately $140,000 has been spent as of last week, but as you've heard from Mr. Whitmer previously, the cleanup will continue into at least February and maybe beyond that point. For context, the cost of the summer windstorm was about $280,000, so about double the cost that has been incurred to date for the ice storm. But I'd remind you that only $45,000 of that was a true variance in our budget. The balance of those costs were basically covered through the existing budget, but necessitated the deferral of other works that had been planned and simply could not be accomplished. We do anticipate that the cost for this storm will be somewhat higher, but not significantly higher. So there will be a significant cost to our budget. A portion of that will be a true variance in our budget for the year. And I can advise that there is no insurance coverage for damage to city trees, city shrubs, overhead wires, transformers mounted on poles, that sort of thing. As you've heard, there have been a number of reports late last week out of the GTA concerning some municipalities that have adopted resolutions seeking to have the province declare their municipality a disaster area for the purposes of receiving funding. And I'll provide some background on that program. The program is called the Ontario Disaster Relief Assistance Program, and I'll refer to it just as ODRAP for short from this point on. That program has existed for many decades, and it seeks to provide financial assistance within a provincially declared disaster area to restore damaged public infrastructure and or private property, and this point is very important, where the cost of restoration exceeds the financial capacity of the affected individuals, municipality, and community at large. There are 3 steps that must be followed before any funding would be applied. The first would be for the local council to pass a resolution within 14 working days of the onset of the disaster to essentially ask the province to declare their municipality or a portion of it a disaster area for the purposes of funding. Incidentally, that deadline will come tomorrow, and so hence the reason for the update today. Assuming that a council makes that resolution, it's in the hands of the minister. Ultimately, it's up to the minister to either declare or not declare the area a disaster area for the purposes of funding. And ultimately, no funds will be received unless it's determined that the damage is so extensive that it exceeds the capacity of the affected municipality to manage. So I would suggest to you that it is a fairly high threshold, and history would tell us in this program that that threshold has been set high. Although it's not a feature of the program, notionally in the past, I've understood that costs must exceed 4% of own purposes taxation. So in the case of the city, that would be a threshold of $4 million of cleanup costs before the province would look at providing any sort of funding. And as you've heard, we don't anticipate coming anywhere close to that threshold. You've heard, I think, in the reports that some municipalities are including hydro costs in their total cost of cleanup. And categorically, I can tell you that the province has been very clear that hydro costs are not recoverable through this program. There are separate avenues available to hydro utilities through the OEB to apply for a special rate rider to recover certain costs. And again, that's subject to certain timelines and thresholds as well. Hydro is well aware of this, and they'll update the board at the end of January with respect to their recommendations there. So I think it's fairly clear to staff that unless the province establishes special provisions outside of the normal ODRAP requirements, we do not even come close to meeting the previously applied threshold to receive any funding for the ice storm recovery, because it is not beyond our capacity to manage. And for that reason, we're not bringing forward any resolution for council to adopt today.
Okay, thank you for that update, but I have some questions. Councillor Davey?
Thank you. For interest's sake, do you have an idea of, is there any benchmark for what the amount, like the percentage that typically gets covered, or is that up to negotiation from the province?
I believe the province can cover up to 100% of public costs. Where it has been applied in the case of damage to private property, there would be a fundraising component and a matching component for the province. But again, my understanding is it's all subject to ability to pay or capacity to manage, and so typically the province would look carefully at the cost, look at the affected municipality, and make determinations around how much they would fund.
Okay. And with respect to hydro, you mentioned that our local hydro could apply for a rate rider, so essentially they could look at increasing their rates. It have to be approved by the province, but based on this for a couple of years or something to cover some of the costs?
Yeah, my understanding is that if approved, that rate rider could be applied outside of their normal rate setting cycle. I don't know the duration for which it would apply. I take it that would be a part of their filing. But essentially they can do a separate rate filing. It would go through a process that's public and open to challenge, and if approved, then it would apply to the rate.
Okay. In terms of the threshold, actually that makes some sense because my understanding is, so it's basically 4% of, you can think of the tax levy portion, is that? Okay. Because I understand Toronto's claiming $100 million damage, and I believe 4% of their budget is about $96 million, so they're over that threshold. Now, do you know if that includes some of the hydro costs, or is that?
Let's see if I have.
Sorry, I know a report isn't prepared on this, so if you want to follow up, that's fine.
Yeah, I don't have the report here. My recollection, Chair Davey, is that including hydro costs, the amounts were higher than that.
Really? Okay. Okay, thank you.
Mayor Zaire?
Thank you. I just have one question. The reference that Councillor Davey has already made to the GTA, or at least the City of Toronto, and other cities within the GTA are also contemplating doing it collectively. So my question is, because the extent of the damage in Toronto was significantly more than it was here. Notwithstanding that, the figure that they are throwing around surprises me as well as to how high it is. I had heard in the outset, as they were putting figures together, that there may have been in inserting the replacement costs of the tree canopy. And that may be why some of their costs are the way they are. Is there anything in the provincial legislation that would deal with that, or is it only dealing with the actual cost now, not to restore back to what it may have been prior to the storm? If that were the case, eligibility. And by the way, I agree with the position that you've taken at this point in time that I don't think that we should be asking for that declaration. It's well within our capacity to deal with this. But would that potentially change if it was replacing tree canopy?
Raising a good point, Mr. Chapman.
So I'm looking at the province's guide, and it does indicate that the program restores damaged public infrastructure to pre-disaster conditions. You are correct. I believe some of the costing we're seeing under the GTA includes the cost to replace trees. I don't know that there's precedent for this, but I would find it, I would be surprised if, given the province's financial constraints right now, they would go to that extent. My understanding has always been that public infrastructure is more defined as critical public infrastructure in the traditional sense, and that's not a value judgment against the value of trees, but to me it's about infrastructure necessary to sustain ongoing operations. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for looking this up and dealing with it. We had been communicating back and forth a little bit over the last couple of days, and I agree with the position that Mr. Chapman and staff have taken at this point in time. We appear, even if we were to add in some of those costs, that we are still well below that threshold, and sure, I'd like to have some an assistance to deal with those costs, but I think if we were to ask for that declaration at this point in time, and where our costs are, our credibility would be at stake, and so I would suggest that we are not proceeding, and there is no recommendation to proceed, and I agree with that.
Councillor Glenn Graham.
Thank you very much, Chair Singh, and I just would like to clarify that our costs do not anticipate the restoration of the tree canopy. Is that right?
Through the chair, the costs that I've quoted are only costs to deal with fallen limbs and damage to property. Those costs do not include replacement of trees.
Okay. Chair Singh, I just have a very brief comment. Should I wait or should I make it now?
I have one more question, so I'll come back to you. So if you want to queue back in. Councillor Ranovich?
Well, question and comment, so.
Okay, well, there's no one after you, so.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just specifically with respect to this, I mean, based on the information that we have right now from the province and the program, I would agree with the position that staff have taken. I think we need to see how things evolve, and I would be very surprised if they do end up deciding to do something that other affected areas potentially wouldn't be able to partake in the process even subsequent if that's the route they end up going. But I think more importantly from my perspective, and I guess this is a request for information, is we've now had several events. I mean, we've had the two events in the summertime, one more significant than others. We've had this one, which was overall had greater impact in the community. I think it would be beneficial for our senior management, together with the other affected agencies, Hydro, police comes to mind, and so on, to actually do a debrief. You may have already done some of this already after the summer one, but to actually do an overall debrief in terms of how everybody has handled this, what have we learned from these experiences, and what kinds of things do we need to do going forward. I mean, some of this, I think, is going to impact us from an infrastructure perspective in the future. From a climate change mitigation point of view, do we need to start changing the way we do some things in terms of our infrastructure as we look to replace it in the future? But the other thing is, you know, are there some things we need to change from an operational point of view? I mean, we know that Hydro needs to make some changes from a from a communications perspective, and some of that is happening already. I know the police have expressed some frustration around the fact that they use extensive resources, having to basically be there to protect the community from live wires or downed wires, and end up incurring overtime costs because of that. Is that a good use of police resources, or should somebody else be doing that? So I think we need to do that kind of analysis and maybe bring a report back to us in terms of, you know, what that debrief has said and what we've learned for the future. I don't know if Mr. Wilmer wants to comment on that.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Councillor Urbanovich. Yes, that debrief conversation has already started, but certainly it is an ongoing discussion as well. There was a recent meeting of the Regional Emergency Planning Advisory Committee, REPAC, and at that time we did a debrief on the spring ice storm as well as the two summer events and the lessons learned from that. But certainly, your point is well taken that severe weather events seem to be becoming more the norm in the current state of affairs than they have been in the past generation, and so we are always needing to adjust. And to advise committee as well, the hydro utilities, the police, and fire departments and ambulance are all part of that group. So the right parties are at the table. But yes, we have that ongoing conversation and can report back.
Councillor Glenn Graham, you had wanted to make a comment? Can you queue back in? Great. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I think it's true that there's one taxpayer and that certainly we shouldn't ask for this money because truly we're not at the point of undue hardship. But I also think that it's an opportunity for us to look at proactively managing our strategy in climate adaptation. If we're looking at, I heard a number of comments about trees that were complained about, but we didn't have the resources to get ahead of this and to take down branches. So I think that's also a feature of what we should be looking at is between Hydro and city staff, can we develop a strategy to manage areas where there's vulnerable limbs and trees? So I think that's something that we need to look at going forward.
Great. I don't see anything else, so I guess meeting adjourned.